mai, haere mai ki Strategy, Operations and Finance hui of the 9th of June. Welcome to elected members, both councillors and community board members, also to our iwi partners and to council staff in the room today, and also members of our community who are joining us as well. We're looking forward to having a nice and efficient meeting. We do have another hui at 12:30, so we're just going to try and get through our agenda at pace while still obviously allowing time for questions and discussion where appropriate and relevant to the paper at hand. So I'll just do karakia to open our hui and then we will crack on with our agenda. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina kiuta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, tihei, mauri ora. Awesome. So we'll take item number 2, the council blessing, as read. Item number 3, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Ko, from also Andre Baker, representing Te Atiawa Whakarongotai, and we have Councillor Cooper joining us online, and staff will let me know if we have others popping in online throughout the course of the meeting. So could I have someone to move those apologies be accepted? Councillor Halliday seconded. Councillor Mayor Holbrow, all those in favour? Against? That's carried. Just before we move on to item number 4, declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. I haven't been made aware of any and don't see any raised. Don't see any raised around our table. So we'll take item number 4 as a given. Just to remind us all of the Strategy, Operations and Finance meeting tikanga that I did share around in terms of the ways in which our meetings will function, just to ensure efficiency, but also good collaboration and decision making around the table. We received a couple of questions ahead of time relating to items on our agenda which staff have responded to, so thank you to those who did submit questions ahead of time, specifically pertaining to operational matters. And we will also be, as it's mentioned in the tikanga, taking regular breaks, so we'll take a break at 11 a.m. So just, hold on until 11, and then you'll be able to grab yourself a cup of tea and coffee or whatever you need. We'll go through until 11. So item number 5, public speaking time for items relating to the agenda. We just have one public speaker this morning. Welcome to the table, Sean Rush. And you would have also been sent through some of the submitters' notes and paperwork, and I believe you have something to table with us today as well, Sean. So we'll hand over to you and just hold questions until the end of Sean's kōrero.
Kia ora. Yes, no mai haere. I don't recall getting things from submitters.
Oh no, sorry, I just mean we were alerted to the fact that you were speaking and we were provided with
okay, so I've seen some stuff through. So
that's what I meant.
Well, okay, so thank you very much. Wonderful to be here. So bit of background on me. I formerly was Wellington City Councillor, 2019-2022, didn't stand for re-election. And what I'm going to speak to you about today really comes from my advocacy for coastal ratepayers in the southern and eastern ward. When I stood for election in 2019, I was just finishing my course of study for a Masters in Climate Change Science and Policy, which I graduated with, and as a consequence became very familiar with the climate indicators that affect Wellington, in particular Wellington. So that would be the wind, which we all are familiar with, which is actually dropping, rainfall, and sea level, which I'm going to speak to you today. In addition, my wife and I own a property in Otaki on Marine Parade, and my mum and dad live there as well in the seagrass development. And I guess that's why I'm here today, because I've taken an interest in what the Kapiti Coast District Council are doing, and of course, Right Honourable Jim Bolger's work as well. I know about the Coastal Ratepayers United group, and I have liaised with them, but I'm here on behalf of myself today as a ratepayer, as someone who has some knowledge and someone who's doing work with the Ministry for Environment in regard to the space. So I know I've only got 3 minutes, I believe, so I'm going to quickly race through. I've probably used 2 of them already. I mean, so there are 3 things that I want to talk to you about. One is that, and I've had fruitful discussions and confirmation with the Ministry of Environment, that estimates on sea level rise need to adopt a likely scenario. That's Department of Conservation's guidance. Ministry for Environment do recommend stress testing your scenarios using what's known as RCP 8.5 and RCP 8.5 plus. In addition, actually, I forgot to mention, I was an expert reviewer for the IPCC in the most recent report. So what I'm about to tell you comes from that experience, is that RCP 8.5 is no longer viewed as a plausible scenario. So if we want to be using likely scenarios, we need to observe what the IPCC say and walk back that RCP 8.5. Now, that's a discussion that's been had with the Ministry of Environment, so probably needs to be just put on your radar. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the recent estimates that came from a project known as the Sea Rise Project. I know the two lead authors involved in that, and they work in the same School of Geography and Earth Sciences that I graduated from. So what I just want to say to you is that the technology used is very novel. It's struggled, although a manuscript was submitted for publication in the peer review in July last year, it has not managed to pass the peer review process. And there's a number of reasons for that. But importantly, their estimates of subsidence around the coast are quite exaggerated and don't account for what's known as slow slip events, particularly relevant for here in Kāpiti, where the land's actually uplifting over shorter periods of time. During the time that they did their study, which was between 2003 and 2011, there was a subsiding trend. And sure, if you project that out, you'll find that in 100 years' time, relative sea level rise has increased in a marked fashion. But we're not seeing that with the tide gauges. And the reason is because actually over longer periods of time, the 10 to 20 year periods, we're actually seeing these, what they call slow slip events. And GNS are all over this. In fact, GNS released a few weeks ago a report from one of their experts showing that actually the Kāpiti coast has lifted up a whole centimetre, which we were talking about a couple of millimetres every few years, is significant. So just a bit of caution that the science is still evolving in this space. And, you know, Mr. Bolger might want to put that in the pot when he's considering what his recommendations might be. So I have also tabled a more lengthy document which goes through the whole story of when this study was released. It was released to the press, but wasn't released in the peer review. I actually rang up the press and said, can you show me where the report is? They didn't have it. And then the GNS guys said, well, actually, it's still in development. So turns out that Vic University's comms team had prepared a comms strategy 6 months before it was released in October in 2021. So this was always going to happen, driven, I think, perhaps by the managed retreat legislation that seemed to come out about the same time. But I'll just park that and leave that with you. As I say, I'm having fruitful discussions with the Ministry for Environment, who are engaging with the Sea Rise project team, and they have asked me to maybe just let them sort this out in the peer review, and I'm prepared to let them do that. But just a heads up that there might be some changes coming. Happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Kia ora, Sean. And yeah, thank you so much also for providing your kind of lengthy submission to us as well. That's really useful for us to take home and dive into as well. I think there's a few questions from the table. Deputy Mayor Kirby.
Thanks, Sean, for coming in. Appreciate it. Sorry I haven't read the substantial one. I was heading to bed at the time it arrived into an email last night, so I will enjoy reading it. Just a question from me. One of the things that we're probably interested in and keen on is some guidance from central government around our response on coastal hazard and all of that. From your exposure in that space, are we likely to get some guidance or something from central government that makes it easier for us as local councils to make the decisions we need to make?
Before the election or after the election? I suspect that they might have a full book before the election. I mean, what I do know is that the Ministry for Environment are working very hard to update their interim guidance on coastal planning. So they updated it in 2017, where they included the IPCC's most extreme projections as a scenarios to stress test your modelling.
Yeah.
They are working hard to update that, to finalise that guidance. And as I say, I've been in discussions with senior people, both in their scientific community, but also their administrative community about that. And I know that they are talking with the Sea Rise team about their modelling, but also with the guys at NIWA who promoted the RCP 8.5 scenario and where that might go. What I would say, though, is that in all respects, the Department of Conservation's guidance overrides anything Ministry for Environment puts out. And you can see that in their guidance where it says at the very beginning that this is not to be taken as overriding any other sort of guidance, and that was confirmed to me by Ministry of Environment's head of climate change adaptation. So in that regard, we are back to Policy 24 and looking at the most likely scenarios for coastal planning. That said, if you are planning for a roundabout, you will take in different sort of measures as opposed to a hospital. And that's why these decisions come to community-led groups, ultimately a city council, in order to be taking into account these non-scientific issues that really need the community sort of touch to be able to make appropriate decisions.
Okay, thank you. That's no further questions from me. Thank you.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you very much, Sean, for coming along today. Very interesting summary and a very detailed document we got last night. So my first question relates to point 1 that you have got in your summary, and it's saying that the guidance, the Department of Conservation, that should be used as, should override the Ministry of the Environment. So you say here Jacobs used the Ministry of the Environment guidance, which is this RCP 8.5. Are you referring there to what has been used in the Kāpiti in terms of
Jacobs 1 and Jacobs 2? I think there were 2 volumes. The first one was a methodology one, and the second one was what happens when you apply that methodology. And I haven't looked at it recently, but my recollection was that indeed they used Ministry for Environment guidance, but didn't go through. I think they misquoted the Policy 24 guidance, left out a very important bit, which was about using the most likely scenarios. I don't think they did that on purpose, by the way.
Yeah.
And all the references that I saw to their estimates were based on Ministry for Environment guidance, in particular using this extreme scenario that the IPCC now is saying is not really plausible.
So that's something that Takutai Kāpiti needs to look at to actually really understand whether or not they're using the correct information for their modelling.
Yeah, I mean, this was articulated to the was it Coastal Planning 2 commissioners. So they are alive to it. So I am interested to understand how what Mr. Bolger's work is working in tandem with the commissioners' work, which goes to the very heart of, I think, the coastal planning outcomes.
Thank you very much for that. So my second question relates to the Sea Rise project, and I understand the implications of when something hasn't been peer reviewed. But why is it still actually out in the public arena then, if it hasn't been peer reviewed?
Ministry of Environment were shocked when I told them it hadn't been peer reviewed.
Is that right?
It hadn't passed. I want to be very clear. It was given to people in New Zealand, Wellington Water, I don't know why, someone at Greater Wellington Regional Council. So what my understanding there is that the peer review was really more about processes as opposed to scientific merit. And so when they sent their manuscript off to the American Geophysical Union for publication in one of the big journals, it got pushed back. In fact, some of the team that make up the Sea Rise group, in particular a woman called Dr. Laura Wallace, who I've mentioned in this, she's the expert on slow slip events, have made it very clear that the modelling needs to account for these uplifting events as well as the subsidence. And actually, and I've been in touch with experts. Well, there was Willem de Long, who's the Coastal Ratepayers United expert for sea level rise from Waikato University. A chap called Professor Andy Nicol, who's well known as a geoscience scientist in that fraternity. I worked with a guy, Dr. Ian Wright, who was the coastal planning engineer for Christchurch City Council. And because of my background in the oil and gas industry, I reached out to senior people in the geosciences community and said, is this kosher? And they said, no, it's not. And they put me in touch with these people. So it has caused quite a bit of a rift in that community. So we're not talking climate change, we're talking about tectonics. So it's a very different subject for which New Zealand is well blessed with experts. It's a lively point of discussion.
Thank you for bringing these matters to our attention today.
Okay.
I might just quickly pass over to Chris Purvan, our General Manager Strategy and Growth, for a response to some of those questions as well.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate that thank you for bringing this to our attention. And I think at our end, we are always looking at new information that's coming to the table to ensure that we have current thinking on the table. So we'll take this back and have a look at it and possibly come back to you. But just to say that I think we're obviously wanting to make sure that we have the best information to hand to support Jim and the panel to put some recommendations through the council, and I know that they're very much thinking about these issues, and so we'll be able to make sure that we've thought about that, and it's also relevant for some upcoming changes around our district plan. So really relevant, and so we've got your name and number, and we'll likely come back to you so that we can explore it a bit more. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm very happy to, just so you know, I've been in touch with the Chief City Planner at Wellington City Council, who I used to work with, so it's Liam Hodgett. So Liam has actually been following this journey somewhat with me, and when he realised that MFE was taking this seriously, he's recognising that so do they. So very happy to help. There are some other geoscience experts at Vic University and at GNS who are worth talking to, but we can take that offline.
Mayor Holbrook.
Thanks so much for coming in today. It's really valuable to have somebody with your level of expertise feeding into this process and in our community. So, yeah, I just think it's going to be an opportunity for you to maybe liaise directly with the Takutai Kāpiti panel, and certainly, as Chris said, we'll be taking all this on board. I'm just asking, there was a leaflet that was put in letterboxes around the coastal area, which has some of the same wording as your submission today, in that the RCP 8.5 leads to an implausible outcome. Did you have any input into that?
No. I was made aware of that, and I mean, to be clear, the wording around plausible, implausible is actually directly from the IPCC, so you can actually go to Working Group 1 where they discuss it, and I've referenced the paper that they rely on on footnote 1. So there's no magic in that words. There's no ownership either. But no, I had absolutely no idea. I don't know who did it, and the people I know at Coastal Ratepayers United are equally unaware as well.
Yeah, it's a mystery to us all.
Yeah, it's odd, but I looked at it and went, well, that's a bit of good science.
Obviously using the same reliable sources, but in a slightly different way.
I have to say I didn't read it. Didn't take long to read the whole lot, nor I was just interested, and it's probably in the letterbox. on Marine Parade that my 9-year-old son has locked and thrown the key away. So
Certainly the information that you've provided and the approach you've taken are somewhat more fruitful than that approach. So thank you very much.
thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
No, pass.
At my discretion as well, I'm going to invite the Right Honourable Jim Bolger to address a question to Sean, so I will hand over to Jim.
It's a privilege.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, Sean. We haven't met. Sean, I was totally intrigued by your connection with the oil and gas industry, because they are the most affected by any changes in this space. And I'm reminded of the enormous disinformation that the tobacco industry put out for years and years, that tobacco was quite safe. And it's a harsh question, but I couldn't help but draw a conclusion between your involvement with that industry, which will be seriously affected by any changes to the use of fuel. The European Union, I was speaking yesterday to leadership in New Zealand, the European Union are going to stop the sale of cars with internal combustion engines, in other words, burning oil, because of climate change. So the connection between that industry and climate change is dramatic and direct. And I was wondering how much you were able to disconnect yourself from your old industry, if that's what I describe it, and now, I guess, urging Council to take a softer line on climate change. At least that's what I'm presuming you're drawing to the attention of Council. And I'm delighted I'm here to listen, because, you know, I'll be talking shortly, but we're only partway through our journey in terms of what advice we might ultimately give Council.
Well, I'll say one thing very firmly, Jim. No oil company is paying me to be here. No oil companies paid me to do a Masters in Climate Change Science and Policy. And all the oil companies I've worked with have actually been supportive of the decarbonisation objectives and the transition. I'm going to assume that you're not making aspersions on my character.
No,
Good.
We haven't even met, only from...
You know my mum and
distance
dad,
apart.
though, right? Bob and Carol. You know them. Anyway, what I would say is this. For almost 20 years, I lived in London, wanting to come back to New Zealand. I was working as I started life as a criminal lawyer in Napier, actually, but I ended up in the oil and gas industry as a legal advisor, and that was very fruitful for me, a great career, lots of travel, met my wife, came back to New Zealand, but what I really wanted to understand was I recognised coming back to New Zealand would cause a conflict between the New Zealanders who have got a higher level of a recognition of environmental concerns, and I needed to be able to reconcile within myself and to my family and friends that I was not working in an industry that was, to use your analogy, causing cancer like the tobacco industry. Of course, that was only in the United States. We all knew that tobacco caused cancer. It was only in the United States you could sue and get away with it. But anyway, beside the point. So I started looking at this issue. I'm a smart guy, and figured that this issue should be readily understandable to a smart person. I did a short course at Vic, which left more questions unanswered than they answered, which caused me to enrol full-time to study the subject. And I also find there is more uncertainties than the popular narrative puts out. But on this particular issue, I simply look at the tide gauges, Jim,
Yeah, sure.
and I reconcile it with what we know has happened since the sea rise study occurred, and I can point and show that their modelling has been over-ambitious or overly conservative or whatever. I can point to the GNS studies that show that the Kāpiti coast is lifted up by what is relatively a large margin, and I can show that by reference to scientists who are independent of the oil and gas industry. I'm proud of the oil and gas industry. I'm proud of working in it. In reality, the big gain here in climate change has been for gas producers. And ExxonMobil, outside of Gazprom, is the biggest holder of gas reserves in the world. So the real losers are the coal guys, and they've been overtaken by the gas guys.
Hey, Sean, I think you pretty much answered Jim's question. He does have another quick one, and then we're going to have to wrap this here.
And I chair the gas industry board that regulates the gas industry in New Zealand, just to fill in that gap as far as that goes. So I know a little bit about that too.
Yep.
And I have done it since its establishment a long time ago. My question is really very simple. I mean, your presentation this morning left me doubting whether they believe we needed to do anything on the Kāpiti coast or anywhere else, or whether it's a bit of a fiction and we shouldn't be bothering and council should get on with its normal work. Because that's really the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a great point. So where my home is, the beach has been accreting for 70 odd years, and that's, it's hard to believe that's going to reverse. So I know that Raumati is different though, right? And I'm not as familiar with the other parts of the coast as I am perhaps with the south coast of Wellington, for example, or Queen's Wharf. But I mean, there are standard preventative measures which I think are sensible. We need to follow the Department of Conservation's planning guidance. We need to figure out what are the likely scenarios. We need to take a precautionary approach. And
you have studied this for a long time. I was asking a very simple question, so perhaps come back to it. Should we be doing, or should council be doing something or not?
Well, it's a question of what, Jim, right? So do you prohibit people from building, in large parts of Otaki? Perhaps, maybe. All I'm saying is today is that the science that perhaps that you've been adopting in your planning thinking is still under review, and we need to be cautious about adopting that because it may well end up being a barrier to development in perfectly acceptable areas. That's all I'm saying here today, Jim.
So you would allow people to just build houses where they want to because you're not certain of the science?
Yeah, I think we're probably going to need to close this conversation.
Take it offline, Jim.
I agree, Chair. I agree.
The two of you would be really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, me too. Hey, thanks so much, Sean, for your time and for joining us and for answering the questions that elected members, but also Jim as the chair of the CAP have for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we may well continue to be in contact.
Thanks for putting up with
Sean.
me. Cheers. Bye.
All right, so moving swiftly on to item number 6, members' business, leave of absence. Haven't been made aware of any that people are seeking, but again, a reminder to do that through the Mayor's office. Matters of an urgent nature, have not been made aware of any either, so we will keep moving on through. Updates takes us to item number 7 and 7.1, update on Takutai Kāpiti from the Coastal Advisory Panel, aka CAP. From the chair today, so we've got the Right Honourable Jim Bolger spending some time with us. We'll try and kind of allow this update to go on for 15 to 20 minutes, so if you want to take 5 to 10 to give a brief update, and then I'm sure elected members will have questions. So we'll pass to you initially, Jim, and then take questions from elected members. Thank you so much also for making yourself available to speak with us.
Thank you, and sorry to have taken up some of your time and my questions to Sean, but I'll be quite brief and leave the time for questions so that I can respond to whatever the issues are. Let's just remind ourselves what the panel that I chair is trying to do, is to bring together a community perspective by listening to the community on what impact changing climate change, rising sea levels will have on this community, our community. And then in due course, early next year, proffer some advice to council And council itself, of course, will make any final decisions that might emerge from that process. So we're out there talking to the community. We had a big meeting down at Otahanga. I was in Malta, actually. I couldn't do it, but General Mataparai chaired it. It all went very well. There was a big attendance, which is great. So the community is becoming involved. We want the community to become involved and to understand the issues that they are living with and may have to respond to, in my view, will have to respond to. That'll differ according to where they're situated on the coast. I think in terms of the council will have to decide, and it really goes back to my last observation to Sean, they have to decide where they're going to allow houses to be built. And that's why the decisions can't all be put off until next century or whenever. I mean, where houses are built, where buildings are built, not only houses, but is determined now, and that's why you'll need an early indication. But our job is really advisory. Gather together the information, having listened to the community, having listened to the experts, and can I just observe here the little back and forth we had with Sean? Experts have different views across all issues, not only on climate change, on all issues, and needless to say, I've had to deal with that over many, many, many years. So you have to decide which expert you're going to listen to, if I can put it that way. That sounds very cynical in a way, but it isn't. There are so many different experts who have different perspectives, different views, not because they're bad people, they've just come to a different conclusion. And we will have to try and make some judgment. As the council knows, we have on the panel, we have Professor Dr. Martin Manning, who of course is also an expert himself in climate change issues and helped draft the first IPCC report for the United Nations. So we have close-in expert advice for us, as we will have expert advice from outside that we bring in, or council helps us to bring in to listen to. So that's what we're doing. Now, I want, Chair's given you a short time, I'm going to stop there and let you ask me questions, because then I'll be answering the stuff you want to know.
Great, thank you, Jim. And also just acknowledging and welcoming Abby Morris to the table, who is the Coastal Projects Manager at Council, just sitting alongside Jim. So
Thank
yeah,
you, Abby.
any questions from the table? Community Board Member B. Larissy.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Jim, for that very informative update. That's useful. So I'm the chair of the Raumati Community Board, and obviously our community is going to be very impacted by any sea level rise.
Yes.
One of our community board members has been quite involved in the process so far, and what he would like to achieve is for our community board to provide some sort of education workshops for our community. Given that you've said that you want the community board to become involved in your process, would you or would the board be willing to support us to do that?
Short answer, yes. We believe the community boards are positioned to reach into their community and through that process to advise us what the community is thinking, or where their concerns or fears are, what clarification they may want on some report or another.
Yep.
So we certainly are there, willing to work with you and encourage you to work with your community on these issues. What we would hope at the end of the process, that the community of the Kāpiti coast will be better informed and will make decisions on better information than if we do nothing.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So just follow-up question.
Just before you move on to that question, Chris would just like to make a quick comment.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to note that obviously community board chairs have invitations to attend the CAP panels, what I'll call working workshops that they have in advance of community engagement, and it might be through that mechanism that it would be useful to bring a conversation back to the panel, so that through those workshops we can work out what that looks like. And what that support and response is. As I'm thinking, otherwise it would perhaps be 5 different lots of requests coming through, and it would be great for the panel to be able to get that in one conversation.
Sure. I appreciate that. I just would note that Raumati Community Board is the only one that's made a recommendation to Council specifically on this topic. So we have a particular interest because of the effect.
Because the sea is closer.
That's right, and possibly getting ever closer. Perhaps we can start with an informal conversation between you and I and the other board member to talk about
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Take
Cool,
that
thank you.
offline, yep.
Cheers.
Great, thank you, Beat. Over now to Deputy Mayor Kirby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim, thanks for being here again. I was at the meeting, I guess the CAP workshop at Otahanga Boating Club myself, and found it very inspiring, actually, the amount of community engagement and interest. I guess my question is related to just your take on how you feel the community is around knowledge of the issues that we face in regards to coastal hazard. Obviously, as Sean has spoken this morning, and as you've rightfully said, there's a bit of confusion around the science and mixed messaging and some misinformation that's out there that we're having to deal with. What is as a panel at this stage, with the engagement that you've had, what is your feeling of the state of our community around their knowledge and understanding of the issues that we're facing?
Again, short answer is better than it was at the beginning. There has been focus by many people on issues and reading reports and observing, I guess, commentary in the media on this. So my belief is they are better informed, they're more interested, more concerned too, I'd have to say. I mean, you can't talk about something as dramatic as sea level rise and possible coastal inundation and so forth without causing high levels of tension for some people, depending on where their homes are and so forth. So we're very aware of that, and we are trying to make certain that nothing we do adds unnecessarily to the concerns of individuals. At the same time, we know that if we are going to respond to the science, then we have to do something that impacts on somebody's life. You know, somebody has to move. And but I use an example of no names, but a friend of mine built a house north of where we are in Waikanae, on the beach, on the sandhill. And I said to him when he was building, I didn't know it was a great place to build. And when I walk along the coast here and look at that house perched out there on the sand, I think, geez, I'm pleased it's not mine. You know, so there have been decisions made that perhaps weren't that wise. That's all I would say. And council, of course, has a responsibility now to try and prevent unwise building decisions. And that's not easy. I'm not pretending that's an easy option. People have a piece of property and they believe they can use it. And you go along and say, sorry, there's no planning permission to build there because we have reached a conclusion, etc. But they're better informed and I think more willing to listen. That's my sort of view.
Excellent. One of the things that did concern me a little bit at that Otahanga meeting was the sizable portion of our community that wasn't represented. I would suggest, my guess on looking at the age group, the average age would have been in excess of 60.
They own the houses.
Yes, they do, but they're not the generation that's going to be living with the consequences of the decisions that we make in the next year. And so I guess my other question is, and this is probably my own fault for not understanding some of CAP's plans, but what do you have plans on how to engage the generation coming through, our young people, the young families of the Kāpiti coast, which we have of the late 20s, early 30s with young children?
Well, just go back to my earlier observation about the community boards, which have a responsibility, if I use that term, to reach into their community. And I think they are better positioned than us as CAP to try and reach into those communities. But we have done, well, I have no doubt do more on reaching into high schools. I have spoken to the high school down the road, that was Kāpiti. And that's the only other way we can reach that very young group. They're not property owners, well, 99% are not property owners, and to get them engaged. But as we know in all areas, and I say this with reference to those who want to give votes to everybody, that it is harder to get young people engaged in this sort of boring stuff, you know, sea level rise and all that sort of thing. There's much more exciting things to talk about. No, but that's true. That's true for most of them.
Okay, so a follow-up question to that. Is there anything that council can be doing? Obviously, you've referenced the community boards, but anything more that council can be doing to open doorways for those conversations with our young people?
Well, first I want to acknowledge the support, the very fulsome support we get from the council, and we couldn't operate as the advisory panel without it. So thank you, Mayor and Council. Thank you for that. That's very good. And you've seen Abby has to come along and help me out. Thanks, Abby. No, it's we can do that. I think we should have a chat on that. I mean, what else might be done to, and particularly to reach that even younger age, non-property owning, but younger age group who are part of the community and will be the ongoing part of the community. Very happy to do that. We just to look at community representation, we do now have the 3 iwi engaged, though one says it doesn't have the resources to be engaged as much as we might wish, but because that's a very substantial group of our coastal residents as well, and they bring a different perspective to some of these issues. After all, they've been here a hell of a long time, so but if I was to compare where the CAP work is now to the day we started, it has moved forward a lot. The engagement is better, and as I said, the community, I think, are more informed and want to be more informed.
I look forward to those conversations around accessing those younger generations.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, total call there. And I think that maybe the lack of youth involvement, participation or engagement in those hui isn't by virtue of them not wanting to be involved or not finding it interesting or relevant. In fact, as the Deputy Mayor mentioned, it's extra relevant because it's what we'll be inheriting. You know, the decisions that are being made now will shape the community in which we live, and climate change is a threat of massive magnitude. So I would just think, yeah, it's probably figuring out which doorways are currently somewhat blocked and how can the CAP access those and supported by council
Well,
to do so.
this council is very fortunate, dare I say it, to have our chair as a direct link into the younger community. I mean, thank you for that. But not all councils are so fortunate. But, you know, we've got 18 grandchildren. I have a lot of young ones, and they don't all take great interest in this type of stuff. Let's put it that way.
I know the Youth Council is very keen to engage directly with the CAP as well, so that door is very much open and will continue to be.
Yep.
They're very interested. And I know that a bunch of people who I shared the Central Adaptation Area survey with on Instagram were also very keen to fill out.
I was
that
interested
survey.
yesterday, as I said, I spoke to the Leadership New Zealand group, as I do most years, and these are young leaders, and I use the word young, inverted commas, around 30 would be my guess. A very diverse group of people. I was interested, though my opening remarks included climate issues, that I got no questions back on climate issues. So maybe they're not as interested as we might think or hope. That's all I can say, talking to the next generation of leaders coming through. And they were,
Let's have a chat offline, Jim. I think this is
no,
becoming
I'm just telling you what happened as recently as yesterday when I'm talking to the next generation of leaders. That's what they're all supposed to be. They're being guided by Leadership New Zealand. And this wasn't the issue they concentrated.
All right, we've got several more questions. I would love to continue asking them, but we'll pass the mic to others. Councillor Cooper online.
Yeah, hello everyone. I've just got 2 questions, Jim. One is we've heard from Sean today around the contradictory science, and just like to know how you see there's a feeling in the community that the Jacobs is actually quite a contentious report, and some of the science in Jacobs is contentious is the word I'll use. Does the board, or do you accept that this is the case or not in terms of the Jacobs report?
Thank you. We, of course, will be listening to various groups and various science experts and so forth and so on. At the end of the day, we will make a judgment call and make a recommendation based on that. I start from what might be considered a cynical position. I don't believe that science will ever all agree. Have you ever got a whole lot of scientific experts in a room on any topic and got them to agree on anything? I'm sorry. I've dealt with these people. I was a Chancellor of University for 12 years, so some exposure to this. We will have to make a judgment call on where we believe the balance of probability is on the science that we have listened to and those who have presented their conclusions and so forth. So there's no individual person, as far as I know of, well, I don't know them, that you can go to and say, well, just give me the answer on this, A, B, C, and D. It doesn't happen that way. So we'll have to weigh the evidence and make a recommendation accordingly.
Did you have another question, Councillor Cooper?
Yep, just a quick one. Just in relation to the public forums, public workshops. The one I went to in Otahanga there wasn't information on the possible outcomes of the outcomes of the report and the implications of the decisions that will ultimately be made by the council in terms of affecting where we can build, values of property, insurance, individual property rights. And with that being said, how can the community engage in the process when there's no real understanding of the potential outcomes of the report and subsequent council decisions? And I understand that the council will make their own decisions based on your report, but
Just before you...
understand my question?
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Cooper. I'm just going to pass to Chris first and then we'll hand over to Jim.
If you don't mind, Jim. I think, Councillor Cooper, I may just note that you'll be aware that the Takutai Kāpiti project has been run by Jim and the panel, and that they, as Jim has noted, will be giving some advice to you on what they think the best steps are around coastal adaptation and response. The second thing that will be happening is a district plan change around coastal plan, and it would be in that coastal plan where we start to look at the implications for land use, and the advice from the CAP panel will partly inform that, but there's a wide range of things that need to be considered in the coastal plan change, so that will be coming back to you in a separate pathway, for want of better words. So in the engagement that the panel was undertaking, it wasn't to consult on what effectively would be a district plan change. So that would be a subsequent process, and it has to follow requirements set by central government on how those plan changes roll through. So they're connected, but quite separate things. So hopefully that helps to answer that part of the question.
No, with all due respect, I think you've missed my question. My question was, in the workshops, we're asking the community to engage on all things Takutai Kāpiti and coastal, not coastal planning, but climate change, and we didn't inform them. We asked them to engage and keep them in the dark as to the possible outcomes of the things that we asked them to engage on.
Yeah, we'll pass to Jim for a brief response, but we do also have 4 or 5 others in the room with questions. So Jim, if you could just provide a brief.
I can't respond to the Otahanga meeting because I wasn't there, so I apologise for that. I can't help you on that at all. But I imagine the team that were there from the CAP were managing it well, but I don't know. Wasn't there. I mean, the broad question here is, you go from the extremes, you know, that the ocean's all coming in tomorrow and we might as well head to the mountains now sort of style, to the one that nothing's changing and it's all a nonsense. The whole arguments about climate change is a nonsense. And don't pretend those people don't exist as well, because they do. What we're trying to do is get the best science that we can assemble, the best community input that we can assemble, and draw a conclusion from that and make a recommendation. And that's what we'll do.
Thank you. Really succinct. Community Board Member Michael Moore.
Kia ora. Nice to see you, Jim. I think last time we were at each other, we were both working in Parliament. I think you had a different job than I did.
Possible.
And I won't bring up our cartoon that Tom Scott did of us. Look, I live in Te Horo Beach. It's an area very close. It's the biggest kind of rural community in this district We had an issue over the summer where we wanted to instill some more protections on an environmental area. Councillor Pravana, who chairs the Environment Committee, have elevated a subject where we want to give some more respect to that area. The reaction of the community was quite aggressive, of a small, loud minority who want to drive and do whatever they want there. The reason I bring this subject up is because when anything comes up around changing a little rural community like Te Horo Beach, for instance, there's a kind of a loud, small reaction. And there's quite a lot of housing planned and going on even on the south of Te Horo Beach, access off Pukunamu Road. And they're, as you described just before, sitting in the middle of dunes, and it's extraordinary that's occurring there. So I've got a really key interest in how our community is going to react to this and what kind of concern they have as we progress this really important subject for our council. So I just want to thank you for bringing this up and the elevation of its importance.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, well, did you have a question or was that?
No,
No, cool. Okay, we'll have to keep moving along. Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Bolger, for coming along today. Really interesting comments that you've made and really interesting questions. So I agree that it's really interesting. Well, it's really important to have community perspectives on this process, and I acknowledge some of the comments made here. Moving, I suppose, and I know that you have these meetings, and just so that people have a greater awareness of what's going on, are the minutes of these meetings on the Kāpiti?
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's great to hear. So, maybe that could be
Recirculated or something.
Yeah, recirculated, or actually, let people know that they can go and see what is being discussed.
Thanks,
So I suppose, I certainly agree that something has to be done. And as a scientist, to me, the fundamental foundation is based on good scientific information. And
just making sure you have a question.
I do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I have to say, I'm getting mixed messages about whether or not Takutai Kāpiti is actually willing to look at all information. So could you please, Mr. Bolger, clarify whether or not the information, for example, that was presented in public speaking time is being openly considered as part of...
I heard it. I'm the chair of the panel. I mean, we're not hiding from it. I mean, there was nothing that I heard there that was significantly different. It was a view that some of the papers that the technical advisory group provide to us were not as fully up to date with known science as they should be and so forth. As I said earlier, if you put a bunch of scientists together, you will have different views. That's not unknown. In fact, as you said yourself in your science area, that's true. We all know that.
Yeah. So I agree with that, but I suppose when you've got two government departments which are in conflict with each other...
Bit of a pain.
Yeah, so it's a case of where you need to actually really look really quite seriously at the information that's been provided. So in terms of... so you've got the information that you're gathering from the community, but also, as I said, it's based on what the information is that's been gathered from the scientific community. So what is the reason why the Takutai Kāpiti has changed the coastal hazard risk assessment to a vulnerability and susceptibility assessment report?
We haven't changed anything.
So I think actually the terms of reference were for a risk assessment.
The terms of reference, to the best of my knowledge, haven't changed since the day we were established.
But I think that the report that was provided was not a risk assessment.
I think this is, we're getting past the point of just asking a question and then having a response, and I think maybe this is something we do need to take offline.
So can I ask staff that question, please?
Yep, we'll invite a response from Sean, and then we might end your questions there if that's okay.
Yep,
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that question has come up a number of times over the last 2 years, and I can't give you a fulsome answer here, but I know that we've provided a written response to that question a number of times. I'm more than happy to circulate that to all of council, and actually, if you do read the methodology report, which is the volume 1 from Jacobs, there's reference to that within that report itself as well. So again, and that's available on the council website. If you search on coastal science or coastal hazards, it will take you directly to the Takutai Kāpiti webpage, and on that page you'll see both volumes of the report, and there's also other information on there that also links back to that.
Great, thanks, Sean. And Abby, just
Abby.
as a response as well.
Thank you for letting me just clarify. There has been some confusion regarding that. The Jacobs report was a vulnerability risk assessment, not a risk assessment report. So that was a prerequisite. Currently, the TAG are supporting the CAP to make their decisions with doing risk assessment reports. So one has been done in draft for the Northern Adaptation Area, and then the TAG are also starting to do one for the Central Adaptation Area. So they are separate. There is definitely risk assessments being completed.
Great, thanks, Councillor Pravana. We will have to keep moving along. Mia Holbrow. Oh no, sorry, Kim. Sorry, Kim Tahiwi.
Kia ora. Thanks for that report. So just a statement first, and when it comes to mana whenua, we've always erred on the side of the environment. So when it's a toss-up between environment and development, environment always wins. And we've actually been openly voiced that opinion in the intensification rules about building on the coastal borders. So that's always going to be our stance. But my question is, and I think it's more about process and to do with the technical advisory group, because we're lucky enough to have 2 members and 1 member that was already on the technical advisory group, Aroha Spinks. But in the last meeting, there were, from the technical advisory group, and correct me if I'm wrong, there were some options put on the table, and the mana whenua technical advisors that were included were brought in, and they helped develop the cultural values associated with the CAP. And then at the next hui, feedback that I got was there were some ideas put on the table. However, one of our technical advisors wasn't aware of them and actually put our views on the table about what we thought about those options. And it's more of a process question about, do our technical advisors, our mana whenua technical advisors, are they still included in those discussions, or were they only brought in for the cultural values aspect of it?
Abby,
Yeah, I
I'm
might
gonna
pass
ask
that
you.
to Abby, yeah.
Of course, our technical advisors are brought in on all the discussions for TAG as part of the panel. I'm wondering if this is regarding the pathway options.
Yes.
There was,
Yeah.
So we had a one in April where the CAP, where we've got Moira Patamo and Mark Taratoa appointed to the CAP. The CAP, when they make decision, is to be done as a collective. And on that day, everyone had shortlisted the pathways, so they were narrowing down potential options to look at adaptation. My understanding when we came to the next CAP workshop that happened in May, Aroha Spinks did share that one of the options with the soft engineering was no longer desired by Ngā Hapu.
Yes.
That had come out from having further discussions with Ngā Hapu and their whānau. So that is something where we did address in that workshop, going, okay, we hear you, and we're actually looking at doing a new pathway to try and find another solution.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and that's the CAP in action. I just wonder where that disconnect happened at the beginning, for that to occur in that forum instead of in the advisory group.
It was
sounds like
a shock to me on the day, so we're trying to find how to deal.
It sounds like
find a
we
way, a
can probably
solution.
take offline if it's okay, Kim.
Yeah, no, that's
but
fine.
good to clarify
Thank you.
the kind of broader picture of mana whenua engagement, which sounds like it's going really, really well and adding a lot of value to the discussions
It
of the
is.
panel. Yeah. We'll pass to Mia Holbrow.
So I will start with a little bit of a statement. Just a huge thank you to you and the panel, Jim, for the incredible work that's happening. And also I'd point out that this panel was initially put together to work, I think, for about a year on this, and it's going way over time. And
Yes.
and it's way more involved than any of us anticipated. So I just want to acknowledge that they've stuck with it and they're still doing this work on behalf of our community. The Otaihanga workshop was incredible. You know, it was a full packed room of people a really dynamic and valuable conversation, some really good background. I'd reiterate what Chris said about there are other considerations, there are going to be implications, but at this stage, it's very much a scoping, creative process that the panel is undertaking in terms of getting some feedback about what's important to people, how they're feeling, what's their understanding level. And I'd also like to acknowledge the interest that elected members are taking in this. We could have held a council meeting. We had a quorum on the day, and also the community board members. A really, really good attendance by them as well. So I do have a couple of questions. So we've talked quite a lot today about the scientific evidence, and that I think is going to be one of the major issues with this work going forward, is this conflicting evidence. So I'm really wanting an assurance that the panel are looking at all the varieties of evidence, and I'm wanting to know how you then weigh up the different kind of evidence that's coming at you, and how you decide, using, as you say, your best judgment, what you're going to be recommending as a basis, a scientific basis, when it comes back to council.
Well, Mayor, thank you for your earlier remarks. Generous. As the Mayor of the Council, and I know you haven't been there that long, but you've been on Council long, you know Council has to weigh up different viewpoints from your senior executive, etc., 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 on a regular basis, I surmise. I haven't been at the Council table. But any group that are in leadership positions, I mean, all those years in government that had, we had to weigh up different viewpoints and bases and reach what we believed were the right conclusions. That's all you can do. You can't wait for all the experts to agree, because they won't. Some of them won't agree, full stop, end of story. So what we will do, I feel certain, is, because I now know the panel members fairly well, what we will do is, in fact, weigh the evidence as best we can that has been presented to us as to whether we should accept the advice of, advisor A over advisor B. There is no other way we can operate it than to say, well, we've listened to everybody, and there'll be certain biases. The point made earlier by the councillor that, we take the iwi perspective, it will be more protective of the environment than some who are interested in developing, I don't know, theme park. We'll just go to the extreme, out here somewhere. We should do that, yes. Okay, I'm pleased I brought some new idea to the... And it looked nasty, I know, when I questioned Sean Rush earlier. But we have to look at where people come from and what perspective that might have on their advice to us. I mean, I lived through all the arguments on tobacco being a totally harmless, not even addictive, to now the total acceptance that, which I find hard, that it's better to promote another addictive practice, vaping, to prevent tobacco. I find that a bit strange as well, and of course we'll be changing that pretty soon, but my guess we'll be changing that. Australia's already moved to try and ban them, but we're moving more strong. All I'm making is the point is you have to make judgments. The judgment was made quite a long time ago that tobacco was bad, but for decades before that it was considered totally harmless. And there was a fortune spent by the tobacco industry, not only in the US, to sell the story that there was no harm in tobacco. The oil industry has an absolute vested interest in selling the story there's no harm in fossil fuels. That's where they make their billions from. I mean, it's not a complex equation. That's where they make their billions from. And therefore, yes, you want me to stop and so you can get another question. That's all right, I'll do that.
Thanks, Jim. We'll have to probably keep moving. Did you have any other questions, Mayor Hovaro?
I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Time's rolling on.
Thank you. Time is rolling on. Councillor Kāpiti.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair, and I hope this is a question.
it better be.
Jim, no, your wake-up call is really appreciated. I used to be young and used to enjoy the Kāpiti coast. We had 100 metres of beach at Raumati, and we used to surf, and as young people we were very interested in the coast. And then I did a course in the early 70s at Victoria, and it was with Professor D.W. Mackenzie, and I think he was probably the most apt with his philosophies of the hazards of and the future hazards of the Kāpiti coast, and they seem to be falling into line. And I've been designing houses since the 1970s, and Jim, you haven't escaped. You're in one of them.
But you did a good job there.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Councillor Cofer, just a reminder to ask your question.
Oh, yes, I think I'm getting around to it, yeah. So
Could you get around to it a little bit quicker?
We've got Kāpiti Coast, as you know, is different to Wellington. You've got two plates interacting there, forming the harbour and all the, the Hutt Valley and that. Won't go into that. But we've got a very localised situation on the Kāpiti coast here. We've got various factors that you have to look at separately. You've got sediment displacement from the rivers to the north. We haven't got it now from the south there, post-Centennial motorway there in the 30s. We've got global warming and subsequent sea level rise to look at. And of course, we've got geotechnical plate movements here too. And I was just wondering, could we have a council workshop, this is the question, where we get Jim along and have all these very valuable philosophies put together, and we look at it at grassroots level, 101. I reckon that would be really valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We'll definitely take that into consideration. And I think, again, for us to attend the workshops that are being run by the CAP is a great way for us to hear the community's views and to engage in the process.
That's important.
While respecting that it is an independent process that will then provide recommendations back to council. So we do have to remain somewhat.
And remember this morning's news? May was the warmest May we've ever had.
Yeah. Climate change is here and now. Councillor Halliday. And we're just going to take these last couple of questions and then we're going to wrap.
Yeah, I'm just asking for an opinion and just some clarity actually. Because everything I've wanted to know has been covered by the questions. Look, I'm just curious, you mentioned your friend, I'm interested in your opinion here, Jim. You talked about your friend who's building down on the beach as such, and with regards to whether he should or shouldn't build there. But I was just wondering, at some stage, this is going to be a big issue with regards to non-insurance.
Yes.
But if people want to build there at their risk to enjoy it while they can, obviously, no comeback, because if you say sign a disclaimer or anything like that, do you think that's fair and reasonable, or should we just be pulling all people back?
And this is drawing on my experience in public life, when the checks start to be demanded, they normally seek somebody else to help. So at the beginning, when they're building, they say, no, we'll look after this, it's all tidy. I'd have to say my instinct is that council has a responsibility to try and prevent building where they shouldn't be built. I mean, and there's a big block of land being bought, whichever direction we go, on the Kāpiti Road in recent months. And half of that swamp, says an old farmer looking at it, I mean, I would be surprised if you're going to allow people to build houses on it. I don't know. There's a big developer has bought it, I'm told, and what the council's going to do about it, I don't know. But if I was sitting on council, I'd be saying, well, you don't build there or there or there.
Okay, no, thank you for that. That was it. And the other thing was...
Just a quick question.
And the other one, just a clarity. Look, you talked to one of the iwi not being resourced to engage. Just clarifying, in regards to the CAP process, the iwi positions on the panel are fully enumerated. Is that correct?
How do you mean enumerated?
Remunerated.
Remunerated. I just presume so, but I don't know.
Yeah, they are.
Yes,
okay. And that has been the case right from the beginning of the...
I don't think we decide who we pay according to their ethnicity. No, I don't think so.
No, it wasn't specific. I think everybody is remunerated
Everybody's
exactly
paid
the same way. I just wanted to get clarity on that. No, thank you. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, true. Since they've been appointed to the panel, they've been remunerated for their time and input. Councillor Wilson.
Right, I had a couple of questions in relation to the science, but I think there's a lot of questions, and so I think Councillor Cofer's suggestion is a good one.
Yeah, cool. And if we could just not cover what we've already traversed, that would be good.
The one point I would like to make is I would take issue with the idea that young people aren't engaged. I think this is the most knowledgeable generation in history on climate change.
Of course they
I
are.
think young people disengage with a process that they, well, some of them aren't as young as they were when this started 4 years ago. So, you know, the TikTok generation, you know, 4 years of what seems like an appallingly bureaucratic process to a young person, they will disengage. They will not engage with that. But in terms of the broader issue, I think young people are fully engaged with it. So I wouldn't be dismissing.
But who was dismissing? Certainly I wasn't.
Well, I think that what I heard
If you could
earlier
just cut
was
to your question, as much as I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I mean the point is, if young people aren't engaged in this process, that's what we've heard. So my question is, how do we get them engaged in the process? And I don't think it's acceptable to say that they're not engaged because they're just not interested. Because I think they are interested. I think they're just not interested in this particular 4-year-long process so far, which for a lot of young people will look like tinkering. And they're interested in the big picture. So that's wasn't a question, so it doesn't require a response. But all those science questions, I would really like to address those in a workshop.
Yeah, I think Chris has a brief response to that, but I do agree. I know too that Olivia Bird, who's on the panel, has been really putting in hard graft to make sure that young people are connected into the process in ways that works for them, not just through what they might see as a bureaucratic process.
Councillor Wilson, and others who've made comments about youth and the importance of them, I think Jim mentioned earlier that we're supporting the panel, and part of what we will be doing from what we're going forward and as part of our plan at the council staff and operations end is to work with people like Sophie, who is obviously working with the Youth Council to look at ways that we can engage youth. So it is actually part of our plan and part of the focus, and it's going to be added to the work program. So just want to assure you that it is on the radar, and we will be able to let you know how that goes as we go forward, and as Jim comes back and gives updates on how things are going.
And as you've articulated, Councillor Wilson, it's really important. So thanks for just adding to that impetus. Community Board Member Simon Black.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jim, for your presentation. Look, one of the things that stuck with me when we had our coffee the other day is that, you know, Jim said to me that the water is coming, whether we like it or not. I just heard last night that we might not have any polar caps this summer. And I also recognise that there's quite a disparate look on the science, and a lot of the science that I've heard also has misread how quick this is happening. And I was just wondering, my question being, are we keeping the CAP panel around even after the recommendation to actually review and to see whether the science matches, whether we need to upgrade or downgrade the actual risk assessments as we go? How are we going to actually track what's going on ahead after the initial assessment's been made?
You'll have to ask council that, to be honest. We are to report before May of next year, I think that's correct, which I feel certain we will. And but we haven't spent any time really in taking, your point's a very valid one. What happens after then? The wall doesn't just stop and we close the gate and say, well, that's all done, because that's not what's going to happen. I mean, the climate is going to continue to evolve and to change. So council before then will need to spend some time determining how they're going to manage the next phase of this. And but the good news is, in a way, that we're all much more aware of climate issues now and the need to do something. And the debate is the something. And the terrible cyclone we had, Cyclone Gabrielle, has again reinforced to the public at large that Mother Nature can be a very, very brutal boss. And I think there's more and more New Zealanders are aware of what climate can do when they just look at what happened to so many districts across New Zealand. I mean, it's just frightening what's happened. And the costs will be unbelievable. I mean, I was very pleased, and I was saying this in Wellington yesterday, that the government has come out and said they'll buy houses in the wrong space, that are in the wrong place. Or the valley, the Esk Valley, it's totally flooded. What do we do with the Esk Valley going forward? And these sorts of things. I mean, we have only started to answer the questions of one cyclone. Not the ocean coming in, just the damage one cyclone caused. So we have work in front of us. We, the society.
Simon. I think Chris just has a brief comment to make, and then we'll close off.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we'd picked up on your points around the evidence and obviously Jim's response to that. As somebody who has attended the CAP workshops, I think one of the things I wanted to put on the table is the CAP panel and the evidence on the table at the moment by no means is anyone trying to pretend that we have a crystal ball that we can actually predict exactly what's going to happen, and that leans into the idea that there's different views on that. I think the conversation's very much turning towards the triggers for when something, a response is needed. And so I think as CAP comes back and talks about things, that will be something that's very interesting to focus on instead of perhaps a time frame that everybody's saying something will occur when there's many different things that are impacting how that change comes through. So I did just want to say that. It will, of course, we'll come back and see how we can consider the different evidence that's on the table, but we don't have a crystal ball that we've given to the CAP panel so that they can predict what will happen by when. And that's probably a useful thing for you to think about, because that isn't the work that we're trying to put on the table at our staff end.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Chris. Yeah. And just acknowledging Mayor you got another question?
Oh, no, just my observation from that then is, because I can see that, let's say, the sump drains in Otaki aren't working very well anymore, probably because a result of higher water table, more water, and I think maybe the council needs to just focus on core infrastructure, because we don't need the results necessarily to tell us that there's water rising. We just know it's coming. We should need to get prepared now, because it takes time to dig drains and upgrade infrastructure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just make a brief comment on
really
that? I agree
briefly,
with that. That the mundane work of having drains open and clear and so water can move away and so forth. We were looking at the dam that caused a peka there earlier in the year. I mean, a lot of that is maintenance issues. I'm sorry, it's just old-fashioned stuff, as it were, keeping the drains open, letting the water move away and so forth. So that all has to be done.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Okay, sounds good. All right, thanks, Simon. And just acknowledging too the Mayor's comments around your commitment and dedication to this mahi and the expertise that you and the rest of the panel bring.
I will convey it to my colleagues.
Please
Yes, it's certainly longer than we thought.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thanks, Abby, as well, for your work.
Yes, certainly thanks, Abby.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So we did let that conversation run on slightly longer than 20 minutes, as you may have noticed. But it is a crucial topic, and while we have the opportunity to speak directly with the chair of the panel, really good to have many of those questions that were kind of floating around actually addressed by Jim himself. So thank you, Jim. So we will take a short break now until 5 minutes past 11, and then we'll shift up item 8.2, Asset Management Plan, Public Toilets, to our first report for consideration, just acknowledging that there are some staff in the room who have been sitting patiently, so apologies for the length of time we've taken to get through that item. So if everyone could be back promptly at 11:05, that would be great.
Thanks, Chair. If you contemplate being at Mayor